Good afternoon. This is Betsy Gans, and on behalf of the Policy and Community Relations Department at UNOS, I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar. If you're logged into the online portion of the webinar, please remember to enter your audio PIN, which appears on the right-hand side of your computer screen just beneath the phone number. In addition, please put your phone on mute and do not put the call on hold. I would also like to inform you that the call is being recorded. Here are the objectives for today's call. We will present and discuss proposals on the non-discussion agenda for the regional meetings, review methods to submit feedback on proposals, and provide an overview of the regional meeting agenda for the winter public comment cycle. The proposals and guidance document we will review on today's webinar are visible on your screen. After each presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. We encourage you to review the policy proposals, guidance document, and other public comment items currently open for public comment and submit a comment. To submit a comment, please visit the OPTN website at the link that appears on your screen. To encourage public participation and transparency, public comments are published, and in addition to posting a comment, you can also contact your regional representative to the sponsoring committee. Regional meetings will begin this week, and we hope you're planning to join us for your regional meeting. The primary function of the regional meeting is to provide members an opportunity to discuss proposed policy and bylaws changes. The feedback received during the meeting is provided to the committees and to the board for consideration. During the regional meetings, members will also have the opportunity to hear an executive update on current OPTN activities, enjoy networking time with colleagues, receive updates on committee activities, and discuss regional business. Proposals were distributed for public comment on January 22nd and are available on the OPTN website. The proposals placed on the regional meeting discussion agenda will be presented, discussed, and voted on during the regional meeting. High-level overviews of the proposals will be presented on a national webinar entitled Public Comment Orientation. We'll provide details on how those new webinars we'll provide details about those new webinars at the conclusion of today's presentation. The proposals on the non-discussion agenda will not be presented or discussed at the regional meeting, but a vote will be taken on each to provide guidance to the regional counselor during discussions at the board meeting. Members may submit a request to move a non-discussion agenda item to the discussion section of the agenda. To do this, 15% of the member institutions within a region must request that a particular item be moved to the discussion section. All requests must be submitted at least 1 week prior to the regional meeting date. If the 15% threshold is met, then the item will be presented and discussed at the applicable regional meeting. Today's first presentation is from the Operations and Safety Committee. The committee has both a guidance document and policy proposal open for public comment, and both public comment items address blood type determination. Mr. Chris Curran, Vice Chair of the Operations and Safety Committee, will present. And Chris, we're going to unmute your phone line. You are good to go.
Great, thanks, Betsy. Thanks, everybody. Welcome to today's call. The Ops and Safety worked on this, put together a subcommittee along with NPSC to work on this project. So I'll go into greater detail about why this subcommittee was formed and why these are being put forth for public comment. So many of you may remember back in November of just over a year ago, there was a patient safety event related to blood type that resulted in unexpected adverse outcomes. And so that event led to the MPSC charging Ops and Safety with a reevaluation of the current processes and policy requirements surrounding ABO. The current OPTN policy requires OPOs to develop and comply with written protocols to resolve conflicting blood type results, but it didn't really address circumstances where there were indeterminate blood type results, which is actually the more common scenario that we see at OPOs. Not that there's a lot of conflicting ABO results, but that there are circumstances where the results of donor ABO types are indeterminate. It also didn't address new and emerging testing methodologies and factors that can affect donor ABO typing, or the reliability of ABO typing in donors. Next slide, please. So we put together a work group, and there were members from Ops and Safety, MPSC, and the MPSC actually submitted a document to our work group that asked a lot of really good questions and made some suggestions for things that should be addressed by our work group to resolve, both in policy and in educational materials for our membership. We also had members from the OPO committee and histocompatibility. And we were very fortunate to have 3 members of the blood banking community who are considered, high-level experts in ABO typing, were kind enough to join our work group and work with us in drafting a lot of the guidance documents. We also, as I mentioned, we got a letter from, we asked for clarification from MPSC about what exactly they wanted us to address in this subcommittee. And they gave us a lot of guidance, some good questions about things that we should be thinking about. But they did ask us, rather than focus on the one specific event that led to the forming of the subcommittee, they asked us to take a more broad approach to look at donor ABO typing, or ABO typing in general, from the beginning to the end. And so we agreed as a subcommittee to propose policy language modifications, as well as develop a guidance document for the community. Next slide. So obviously the focusing first on the policy proposal. So in public comment, these come out as 2 separate proposals, but we're going to just kind of go over them all as one, because really the work of the subcommittee was on both the guidance document and policy, but we'll kind of present it all together. So policy specifically was obviously the purpose is to increase patient safety, specifically regarding ABO. We also just wanted to provide additional awareness and updates to written protocols and require OPOs and transplant centers to update their protocols when needing to address indeterminate blood type results. We did not choose in policy to specify or dictate a set of requirements, but just that we give in the guidance document the community information to think about when preparing to update their protocols and procedures regarding ABO typing. And so the accompanying guidance document provides a lot of additional considerations and thinking in a couple of examples of what OPOs and transplant centers should be thinking of when it comes to the pitfalls of blood typing. Next slide. So the policy proposal specifically states that OPOs and transplant centers need to have written protocols for addressing indeterminate blood type results, not just conflicting, but indeterminate. So the best example of this that we give is a donor comes into the hospital after a trauma, receives massive transfusions of non-cross-match type specific blood, so they get massive units of PRBCs, and then later on the person becomes a donor and we do ABO typing and find out that the patient comes back as an O, or they're more frequently they have an indeterminate blood type because the forward typing and the reverse typing don't match. And so this should really be a red flag to OPOs and transplant centers that there must be a reason why there's a conflicting forward and reverse typing. And so the policy proposal is to require indeterminate blood type results that there be written protocols to address those indeterminate blood type result conflicts or forward and reverse typing mismatch that take into consideration the entire picture of the donor course, as well as a requirement to capture all of the blood products that the patient may have received since the patient was hospitalized, because that is just more information for OPOs and transplant centers to consider when looking at the determination of donor ABO. And so the policies that are impacted by this are listed there. Policy 2.6, policy 3.3, as well as policy 14.5 pertaining to living donors. And next slide. So obviously OPOs need to update protocols to address both indeterminate and conflicting blood type results. We need to continue, and this is, although we're adding this to UNO's policy language to collect donor blood transfusion records, this is something that is most frequently and commonly done by OPOs already. Transplant programs should update their written protocols to address indeterminate and conflicting blood type results for both candidates and potential living donors. Next slide. So when we look at the guidance document, it's broken into a number of different sections. Obviously, the guidance document purpose is to increase patient safety. It's also to educate our members about the triggers and the factors that could influence the reliability of donor blood typing, as well as when there may be factors that have influenced the reliability of donor blood typing, to give some examples of alternative blood type methodologies. This document also kind of forms a baseline for educating our members about what the commonly used methodologies for determining blood type are now, the gel card method, the tube method, and gives a baseline understanding of those methodologies in determining ABO. This guidance document also provides some best practices to address some of these conflicting or indeterminate results. This guidance document is not a policy proposal, but it does provide some at least baseline understanding of both blood typing and steps that can be taken to resolve indeterminate or conflicting blood types and donors. The next slide. Again, this is the outline of the guidance document that I've already referred to. Alternative testing methods, factors that influence blood type reliability, and triggers for when to consider using alternative methods for ABO typing. And I believe that's our last slide, and with that, I'm glad to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Chris, for your presentation. To ask a question, you can click on the hand feature on the right-hand side of your computer screen, and we will unmute your phone line and call your name. If you do raise your hand, please also remember to unmute your own phone line so we can hear you.
So our first question comes from Ryan Penna, and Ryan, I've unmuted your phone line.
Hi, Chris, this is Ryan Pena. Thanks for the presentation. Just to clarify just because I don't believe I've seen the guidance document, is there consideration for the turnaround time for, I know the DNA-based typing is one of the ways you can resolve when there's been massive transfusion or transfused outside of known ABO blood type. What is the turnaround time and who is responsible for doing that? Only because it's not very common that a lot of centers can do that, and those samples have to go to a reference lab. Is it the OPO, the donor hospital? We are primarily a recipient hospital, so for us to see and verify that source document, or if we identify that there's an ABO discrepancy, it's a little bit harder. So can you just elaborate a little bit more of what the process is supposed to look like in terms of if we had to resort
Sure.
to typing methods that are not readily available for most blood banks?
Sure. Ryan, it's a great question. It's great to hear from you, by the way. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah,
so we had Bill Lane as a member of our subgroup, our work group, and we talked a lot about whether or not this is, some of these alternative DNA ABO methodologies should be something that are even included in as policy requirements to resolve some of these things. The drawback to that being that there are none right now that are FDA approved for validating and confirming ABO. Although there's a lot of research being done and a lot of work being done on some of those DNA-based methodologies, it sounds like it's really not ready for FDA approval or prime time yet. And so the thought was that those methodologies that could be available in some tissue typing labs could be as an adjunct to additional testing that might be available. I think we all accept that, there is no perfect test, but that if some of these DNA-based methodologies could be done in, like real-time PCR-based platforms, that could be something that could turn around pretty quickly. I'm told in just a couple of hours, and if it was to be done in some tissue typing labs on our real-time PCR platform, and would again not as a this is the only method of testing we're going to do for blood type, but that as an adjunct to additional arrays of testing, whether it be at the donor hospital or tissue typing labs by serology, or at infectious disease laboratories by serology, that it could be something that provides at least a little bit more confidence in the reliability of the ABO type. And I'm told it's based on white blood cells instead of RBCs, and therefore less likely to be impacted by transfusion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Great. Yeah, great, thanks. We don't see anybody else queued up with a question. We'll give you a couple more seconds. All right, seeing none. Chris, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
And today's final presentation is from the Histocompatibility Committee. Dr. Kathy Murphy, chair of the committee, will present. And Dr. Murphy, we are unmuting your phone line.
Oh, well, thank you. So today I'm going to present the Histocompatibility Committee's project that's out for public comment right now, and that's updates to the HLA equivalency tables. Next slide. So we are tasked, the Histo Committee is tasked by the OPTN to annually update these HLA tables. So in our current review, we found that some of the tables did need updating. Some of our kits have been updated, and so we're able to actually identify more unacceptable antigens and some additional alleles in typing. Additionally, our tables are becoming unwieldy in size, particularly in the DP beta. So one of our proposals is to be able to use the DP1 beta 1 epitope tables for assigning unacceptable antigens. And I'd just like to say, and I'm going to describe this a little bit more in detail later, that this is not mandatory. This is going to be a voluntary use. If you want to assign all of the alleles individually, you can still do that. But if you want to assign based on epitopes, this will now be available for you to do that too, which would make it much more efficient and less onerous on the HLA lab or the translate coordinators, who's ever putting the data in. And also, one of the last issues that we wanted to address is the period of time that it needs to perform these tables. But by the time we get them through the POC committee, through all of the evidence gathering, and then out for public comment, and then implemented, we're already a year or two behind and have to update the tables again. So we'd like to have a little bit different process that might be able to allow us to update these tables more quickly. So next slide. So some of the updates that are out for public comment right now are updates that are to the matching antigen equivalency tables for B and D, for HLA B and DR, and for HLA B, C, DR, DQ beta, and DP beta 1 unacceptable antigen equivalency tables. So this will also include some additions of newly identified antigens or some alleles. And the source that we're using right now is the latest, or it's probably not quite the latest, IMGT HLA database for updating all of our tables. So next slide. So here is an example of using the DP1 beta epitope optional field. So again, this is optional, it's not mandatory. So what we have on the left-hand side of the screen is how you have to select every available allele that you want to assign as unacceptable individually. So there are now well over 1,000 different DP beta 1 alleles. So this makes it very onerous if you're going to assign some unacceptables that are based on epitopes. So on your right-hand side of your screen, what we propose is to have these two different variable regions, the 55 and the 84, and you can assign them as an epitope. So that means anything that has that epitope, any donor that has that epitope with those alleles present will be screened off as unacceptable. So just for an example, 84 GGPM has 469 alleles that are in that group. So you won't have to go and assign those each individually. Just by assigning that epitope, then you'll be able to screen off every donor that has that particular sequence in the DNA. So it makes it a lot easier, more efficient, and room for less error using these types of epitope-based assignments. So we hope that this will be utilized if people want to utilize this. So next slide, please. So in addition to that, we'd like to make a faster table updates. So currently, and you don't have the latest slide that I really wanted, but the current, if you look up to a future HLA table update and you look down at public comment, what we're currently doing is going right over to the OPTN board for consideration. So this goes through the whole process of that it now currently goes through. It takes a lot longer time than what we would propose. So if there were any objections to these table updates, then it would go through the same process as is currently. But if there are no objections to these tables, then from public comment, it would really go right into implementation. So we would skip this whole middle section of the public comment, and I mean not public comment, but for the table updates. So this would allow us to make faster turnaround times for updating these tables and maybe make them a little bit more real time than they are currently. So next slide. So to implement this, the effect that it will have is on the transplant hospitals and OPOs. We may need to go back and evaluate joint agreements between the histocompatibility labs and the transplant hospitals if this is going to change the way either system operates. So that may need to be addressed. And then we may need to address some third-party vendors to update their programs to reflect the changes that are in this proposal, like software vendors. For the HLA labs, I'm sure we'll have to field any questions that come to us from the transplant community members regarding these value changes, such as the DP beta 1 epitope tables and how those are going to look and how they're going to work, and whether we're going to utilize them in our laboratories or whether we still want to assign them individually. And then we will have to go back to the vendors and ask for our updates for our lab information systems to allow us to be able to automatically upload the epitope tables and the new values that are put in directly from our LIS into UNet. And this will really be able to help us out in not having to do this by hand. So this would be a great benefit for our HLA labs. Next slide. So future dates will be subject, updates will always be subject to public comment, and the OPTN will be able to provide updates to both the members and the vendors in the future. And I think that was our last slide. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Murphy, for your presentation. Again, to ask a question, you can click on the hand feature on the right-hand side of your computer screen, and we will unmute your phone line and call your name. And remember to please unmute your own line.
Okay, so our first question is coming from Marcelo Fernandez Vina, and I've just unmuted your phone line.
Hi, Kathy, great presentation. Just a comment, maybe you should consider for DPB1 using the DP groups that get updated by the HLA nomenclature quarterly, and you would not need to do the approval of the DPB1 if you just use whatever has been listed by WHO, and so you don't have to submit that for approval. In other words, the alleles that have the same beta-1 domain are equivalent, and you use that. You don't need to request for approval. You just go through the nomenclature updates.
Well, the G groups, we do have in the equivalency the G groups. But if you want to assign...
I suggest the P groups that are truly the proteins.
So we will take that into consideration, but we can't do that quarterly because these have to go out for public comment. It's a requirement.
If you say you use P groups, you ask for that and you have it forever approved, rather than getting a list approved all the time. Then you do it automatically. It's publicly available, and so you don't need to go through this exercise all the time for approval. I would suggest that maybe you propose that instead of providing a list. Use the WHO nomenclature.
Yeah, so we are moving toward implementing and using the WHO nomenclature. That's just been, it's a process because you have to update everything. You can't just update these tables, and everything that's associated, which is tie-dye, waitlist, UNET, and all the tables have to have the same nomenclature. So we are working on it. It's just a process. But I will take the P group suggestion back to the committee and see how the field and our community, and see how they feel about implementing these instead.
A second comment is about the epitopes 55, 57. Why don't you do 56, 57? Because 55 doesn't determine it as a distinguishable epitope. It would be simpler. Instead of having 4, you have 3.
I think there was only 3 for the 55.
No, you have 4. In your slide, you have 4. EAE, AAE. AAE and EAE are the same.
Yeah, so that was what was proposed to the committee, so we went with that, but I think that that's certainly an option also to take back. We really wanted to see if people actually even wanted to use epitopes for assigning unacceptable antigens, and then we could expand it across
it's a great idea.
Other different epitopes. So I think it would make it, yeah, it will definitely make things easier.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Great. Well, Dr. Murphy, we don't have any additional questions, so thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you.
And as a reminder, I just wanted to tell you that you can visit the OPTN website to submit a public comment on any of the proposals that are open for public comment now. The website is, there's a screenshot of the website on your screen right now. You just click on the governance tab at the top of the screen and choose public comment to access the proposals. The regional meetings, as I mentioned, are starting this week, and the information for regional meetings is located on the regions page under the members tab on the OPTN website. And from the list of regional meetings, you can click on your region and you can register there for your meeting, and also get details including the location, materials that will be discussed, and additional regional information. We hope you will join us for tomorrow's webinar at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time when UNOS presents a public comment orientation. This is a new webinar, and we will provide an orientation to the public comment process, provide a high-level overview of proposals to be discussed at regional meetings, and will prepare attendees for the regional meetings. Public comment orientation webinars will be repeated throughout the meeting cycle, and we hope you'll join us for one of the 3 sessions offered. The content on each of the webinars will be the same. A non-discussion webinar to discuss the proposal and request for feedback items from the Vascular Composite Allograft Committee, VCA Committee, will be held on Friday, February 21st at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that concludes today's webinar. You can find a complete webinar, the complete webinar details, including links to register on the professional education page under the Learn tab on the OPTN website. All of the webinars will be recorded, and links to the recordings will be posted on this page within a few days after the webinar. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at your regional meeting.